evening. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome. If you have a moment, just let us know where you're joining us from. We always like to know where everyone is tonight as you're with us here. I just want to thank you, first of all, for coming and joining us for this very important chapter chat. Over the last 2 years, our chapter has worked to embed racial justice initiatives into everything we do and into our work. And we don't believe that there are any voiceless or non-communicative communities. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a way to communicate and should be the ones communicating for their communities, not people who don't belong to the community. The Unapologetically South Asian initiative started in our diversity committee. All of the panelists, as well as our facilitator tonight, are all members of that committee. And this initiative really started with just conversations that we were having about what it means and what it feels like to be an immigrant from a South Asian community. What does it mean and what does it feel like to come to the United States and not feel welcome to use your native language, to not feel welcome to engage in your cultural practices? And what does it mean to be a South Asian social worker in our society today? This is how this all started. So I would like it if you would join me in welcoming. You can use your emojis and your reactions to show your appreciation, and welcoming our very fierce panelists, Mohini and Fawzia and Vera and Sidra, and our wonderful facilitator, Dr. Orville Jewett. So I'll hand it over to you, Orville.
Thank you so very much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to facilitate this discussion. I'm going to begin by introducing each of our panelists this evening or this afternoon, and at the same time I'll be sharing a graphic, which I'm sure some of them may wish to refer to as they move into their introductions. But again, I'm Dr. Orville Jewett. I'm faculty at Nassau Community College, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here with you this evening. All right, so the first person that I'd like to introduce to you all, or to ask to introduce themselves to you all, is Mohini Mishra. Mohini?
Thank you, Orville, and hello, everyone. My name is Mohini. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I work with older adults in New York City. I am from a small rural place in India called Saugar, which actually means 100 forts. And this is in the state of Madhya Pradesh, which also means central India. It's central state of India. And I was raised in a traditional patriarchal Hindu Brahmin family. And my native language is Hindi.
Thank you, Mohini. And the next person that I'd like to introduce is Vera Mukirchi.
Thank you, Orwell. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Vera Mukirchi. I am working as a mental health therapist in New York. And I am from India. I was born in then it was a small town called Dehradun on the foothills of Himalayas. And I did my university studies in New Delhi. Then I moved to Calcutta, which borders, West Bengal, neighboring to Bangladesh. And before coming here, I was in Calcutta for 5 years. I come from a Hindu Brahmin family. My native language is Bengali, but because I have been to the other parts of India, so I also speak Hindi and Urdu. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Fawzia Chowdhury.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fawzia Chaldry. My pronounce is she, her. Currently, I'm a first-year MSW student at New York University. And the question about where am I from, it brings a lot of feelings in me because I'm from so many places ever since I was young. I think I have moved around so much that it kind of brings a lot of different feelings in me. The whole idea of putting yourself in a box that where are you from? So far, I'm an Indian, Bengali, Muslim girl living in United States, and we'll see where I go from there and how many more identities add on to my life. But yeah, that's that. And also I aspire to work with immigrants and refugees in the future. So pretty much that's who I am.
Thank you, Fawzia. And the next person I'd like to introduce is Sidra Chowdhury.
Hi, everyone. So me and Fawzia are not related. We just have very similar last names. So in case you were wondering. So I just want to say really quick before I kick off, I just want to give a special shout out to anyone on the line who is fasting today. This is the month of Ramadan. So Muslims are fasting pretty much from sun up to sundown every day for this entire month. So for anyone who's on, thank you so much for joining. My name is Sidra. I have been in macro social work practice as an LMSW for a number of years. I want to say 13 now, going on 14. Majority of my work has been in K through 12 programs, supporting students that are underrepresented, students that are, for one reason or another, at risk of not graduating from school, and just finding ways to support them. So I've been very fortunate to be able to do that work. And when I came to this country, I was 6.5 going on 7. I'm originally from Pakistan, from a small city called Sargodha. And I practice Islam, Sunni Islam, and the languages that I speak are Urdu / Hindi. And I think just like Vera said, Urdu is so close to the Indian language of Hindi that I like to say that I can speak both because, I can have full conversations, in addition to growing up in a household where my family spoke Punjabi. So I'm also fluent in that as well.
Thank you so much, Sidra. So we're going to move now into the next phase of our discussion, and I'm going to be asking our panelists to talk about their immigration journey. And so we're going to start with Mohini. And Mohini, I'd like for you, if you would, to talk a bit about what you'd like to share about your experience and what was the most difficult part of your journey.
Sure. First of all, I really wanted to thank NASW for creating and providing this space. This is my first panel in 21 years since coming to US that looks like this, with 4 brown women on a panel along with Orville. I'm really excited and a bit emotional already. I have so much to share, but I'm going to focus on the initial phase of my coming to US. Also, I feel that in order for me to share about my immigration journey, for context, I also want to share what my growing up was like in India. I grew up in a small rural town in the heart of India. I was raised in a traditional patriarchal joint family, and we lived in our ancestral home with my paternal grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. Given the fact that this was a small rural place, everyone knew each other in the community. My grandfather was the community doctor and a surgeon working with poor rural individuals and families. As kids, we used to accompany him to help engage other children so that their parents could receive care. This was my first introduction to the social work concept of community engagement. My grandfather had 7 siblings, and with him being the oldest, there were always extended family members visiting our ancestral home. Compared to here, there was no concept of boundaries or space or the tradition to call in before the visit for sure. My father was a professor, and through his education work, we even lived in Nepal for a few years. The women of the house, like my grandmother, mother, aunts, were just housewives. I was in my early 20s when I came to United States after my marriage. This was in 2001, right after 9/11. And the initial few years were confusing, challenging, and traumatic, knowing now that I was seen as the brown person of color. I experienced jet lag for the first time in my life. 24/7 price chopper in Massachusetts was saving grace for my initial days, along with all the excitement of exploring different items in the aisles. It was also my reference guide to learn about different items and help ongoing confusion and embarrassment. Yes, I was that annoying person in the bagel shop line who seemed perplexed and trying to hide the shame when asked what kind of cheese or milk for a simple order of coffee and bagel. Where I came from, the only difference with milk was it being fresh or bottled, and there were no bagels. Understanding and mastering walking and driving rules was another experience. I quickly learned that you walk on the right side and drive on the right side of the road. It took me a while to calibrate my muscle memory to not stand on the driving side instead of passenger side while getting rides. After the initial honeymoon phase got over, I realized how lonely and isolating it was. I did not drive and depended upon my husband to return from work to go anywhere. This was after a few failed and embarrassing attempts of me trying to go out by myself during the day and getting lost or just waiting to cross heavy traffic areas. Trips to places like the Indian temple, restaurant, or the grocery stores were soothing and made me feel less lost and more confident about myself. Other times I felt less than and people's way or annoying, especially because I was learning to navigate unknown territories. I also learned that when you are walking, and if by any chance you see another person and they are kind enough to say hello or ask you how you are, you only reply, okay, thank you, and ask how they are doing and continue walking. Yes, leave it at that. You don't stop and really start talking how you really are. But please understand that, where I grew up, when you met people and your hellos lasted for some time, and then byes added a few more additional minutes. I welcome you to observe Indian families in and around you and see how their greetings outside the doors last. Notice how they even have longer goodbyes. That's very cultural. All the free time allowed me to become more aware of other things like the stark differences in the hustle and bustle of life from the city where I came from, with familiar sounds of songs, conversations in Hindi, to finding no one for miles during a workday. All I saw and heard were the cars passing by. I also faced cold temperatures of Massachusetts suburbs for the first time in my life. Yes, I also experienced snow for the first time. I was always cold and overdressed. I wish I knew what dressing up in layers was at that time. I also realized how my day-to-day traditional clothes became clothes that I would only wear on special occasions now. I call them Indian clothes. My educational journey was yet another eye-opening experience for me. I had a hard time learning the APA style of writing, and I also struggled with constantly correcting my spelling from British English to American English. The most difficult change was relearning the whole student and teacher dynamics. In the culture where I came from, teachers were held in high esteem, and it is considered rude and disrespectful to look them in their eye, let alone fathom the courage to call someone by their name. I had my share of awkward moments in the class where I was seen as the timid and strange international student who did not participate in class and seemed disengaged. It took me some time to navigate these dynamics, and I eventually forced myself to raise hands to speak up so that I could grab those extra credits for participation. It was also a daunting task to fit in, especially because folks around me talked about basic stuff that was alien to me. back home, I was never into television or media as much, and it was hard to relate or participate when people talked about TV shows or other references from their high school or undergrad experiences here in US. I was often also seen as a serious person. Well, I could never really crack a joke in English. By the time my brain figured out the translation, I think it lost its humor. So Orwell, your next question was around like, what was the most difficult part of my journey?
Yes.
I think for me, the stark differences in the environment for starters, learning to navigate a new culture and trying to keep it all together while being so far away from family and familiar spaces. I think the constant burden of not losing yourself while still trying to fit in, it really impacted my confidence because at home, I was known by people around me. And when I came to US, I was surrounded by people who did not know who I was. I felt lost because I had to unlearn everything that I learned in my old country and basically start over to fit in. I felt emotionally fatigued and hard to work and had to work harder than others to even manage basic tasks. So I think I can pass it back to you. I have lots to share, but I'm sure we'll have more time.
Thank you so much, Mohini. And since we do have a couple more minutes, I did want to bring everyone's attention to the chat box. There's so much acknowledgement here, Mohini, about how your story has assisted a number of people to reconnect with their past experiences, with their experiences with members of their family, thanking you for sharing your journey with them, loving how much they really appreciate you sharing about your culture, very grateful to be here, and so much, very much appreciative of your being so vulnerable and honest. And it feels like you're telling them, one person feels like you're telling them their story. So I think it was real important for us to be able to read back some of those typewritten comments. Thank you, Mohini, for bringing us to this point in our discussion. And with that, we shall switch to, or we shall transition to Vera Mukirchi. Vera, Vera,
Yes,
the questions are, what do you want to share about your experience?
Wow. So what Mohini said, it's like, it's so similar to what she said. I also grew up in a small town. Dehradun it's now a capital city. But when I grew up, it was a very small town. It was on the foothills of Himalayas. Everybody knew everybody. My father was in the Indian government service, and we lived in an office campus. So it was a small world. And the expanded version of that world was, going to the main market area, familiar faces. As Mohini said, you meet somebody, you say your hellos, and then there is a little more than hello. Like, there is concern, there is people, asking you questions, and they want to know is everything is fine, if something is needed. If a single hint of concern is shared, somebody else would say, oh, by the way, I know someone who can help you. So it was an instant resource building. It was an instant connection, creating that network. And it was nothing formal. It was something that came natural. When we moved from Dehradun to New Delhi, which is this huge city, it was big. It was big. And to some extent, New York City reminds me of New Delhi. But even then, the interaction, the busy life, everything was doable. Now, when I moved to Calcutta, as Mohini mentioned, we also had a joint family. And until now, I was in a nuclear family where it was mom, dad, my elder sister, and myself. And when we moved to Calcutta, it was a joint family. And it was very exciting when I got my visa, when I got my acceptance for the PhD program. I was the first one to actually get into a PhD program outside India. And that's when the first time for me started. first time everything. And frankly speaking, I had never taken a flight in my life. We always traveled in trains and buses and drove, carpools and things like that. Flight was very exciting. So there was a lot of rush, things going up and down, excitement, what you want to do, how you want to do it, things like that. And for me, taking the flight for the first time was exciting and scary. And when I took the flight, it was not a direct flight. So it was not the 14 plus hours that you have now in direct flight. I didn't have enough money at that time. So whatever my savings were, I put in for the ticket and the initial tuition. So we took a flight that would hop in Heathrow and then come here. So it was a total of 23 hours. And my first experience with the flight was like, I just hope it lands safely. It was like it should take off and it should land. What happens in between, I'll sleep, I'll eat, whatever I'll do, I'll watch some movie or something. But that's how that anxiety that first time started. And I thought once I land, things would get fine, because luckily my sister was here from some years ago. And I thought, oh, my sister is there, things would be fine. Little did I know that after landing, there's a whole different story, because it's completely your individual experience. It's completely your own journey of holding on to your identity, holding on to your confidence, making sure that you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Now, when I joined the PhD program, I was a week late because of the paperwork and everything. So there was this anxiety. I don't know how much I have missed. It was a first time. Jet lag was a big challenge. I remember I had landed on a Friday morning, and Monday I started my classes, and I would doze off in the classroom. And where I come from, it's a rigid education system. It's very disrespectful if you're sleeping in the class or you're not paying attention. So to me, just dozing off or leaving the classroom frequently to splash my face with cold water or drinking, water again and again, it was so uncomfortable. And little did I realize that it was okay until like 8-9 months into the program, when one of my professors was very supportive. And they told me that it's okay, you don't have to go through so much of pain. It's all right. It's okay. But until that statement, until that conversation, it was a constant feeling of guilt that I'm not being enough. I have done so much to get this place in this classroom, in this program, and I'm not able to pay attention. I was always cold. The AC killed me. I would wear, fleece and a big jacket, and everybody would look at me like, what's wrong with her? Like, she's crazy or what? But I would still shiver while I was, trying to pay attention at the notes. Basic information, basic jokes did not come. One of the things that was really difficult for some time was going to the cafeteria and getting food. So I remember once I went to the cafeteria and I was asked to stay or to go. And I'm thinking, is this person asking me to stay in the United States or like what? So I said to stay, thinking that the person is asking me about my staying here because obviously I look not American. And then I realized after a long time that to stay means that you sit there and you eat, and to go means you parcel it, you take it and take it home. So it, like little things, basic things, when you're doing your assignments. I had a major in English before I did my special education and, prepared for my PhD in social work, focusing on disabilities and all. And I knew that my English is good enough. I have a major, there's nothing wrong with it. But when I came here, it was like everything was, red mark. My spellings were really bad. And I'm like, what's going on? So yes, British versus American English. The U's were going out. The sentences need to be short. And in my mind, I constantly struggled that what is important? The concept that I understand and that I'm trying to convey through my writing, or the writing and the spellings itself? Because the concept was clear, it was just about the spellings. The ideas that I explained were clear, it was just about the length of that sentence. But yet it was a challenge, a big challenge for a few months. And that was, what should I say? It was bringing down my confidence. There was a stage, I would say, like 6 months, I felt I was so depressed. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to share it because it also meant that I'm not good enough for this program, or maybe I'm not able to fight enough, because where I came from, my parents have always been, encouraging both their daughters that you have to be fighters, you have to challenge yourself, and you need to move on. And to that, at that stage, to me, it was like, I'm not able to move on, I'm stuck. And that feeling was terrible. My experience, I would say the first thing that hit me really big was the distance from what I knew home for 28 years and now what I know as the place where I came to study. That flight was long, very, very long. And during my stages of, losing confidence and identity crisis, and trying to find some support, something somewhere, not that my sister and my family was not supportive, but this is something that I couldn't share with them. I couldn't talk to them because this was my own struggle. It was happening inside me, inside my mind, inside my heart. So to me, that feeling that my house, my home is too far away, I just can't board a flight and go back because it seemed that the road was not there anymore. I had to do what I have to do here. And that is a big struggle. That's a big challenge. I think I'd stop there, Over.
Thank you, Vera. And, again, back to the chat, the chat box, a number of really impactful statements here. Feeling like you're not enough, what a powerful statement of truth. And assimilation, a push to assimilate, has angered me for 26 years, and I have pushed back. That line, feeling like you're not enough, what a powerful statement of truth. Another person's very excited to be here in this space with you. And another person writes, I'm so grateful to be able to hear your story and have similar feelings. Thank you for this space. This is amazing. Thank you so much for initiating this. Thank you, Vera. We needed to hear your story. Yeah, and another person who writes that as the immigrant experience from Calcutta, and you bring back so many memories from my early days in this country. Yeah, just such wonderful commentary. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for listening. This feels like, as I see Samantha wrote, the chains are broken. Yes, this feels like, when you say it out loud, it's like freedom, because you carry this. And many people might think that it's luggage, negative, but it's not, because this is an experience. And this sometimes, yes, makes you sad, but at the same time, it builds that strength and makes you a better person when you see somebody else struggling in a similar situation.
Thank you so much, Vera. And now we have Fawzia Chowdhury. Fawzia, what would you like to share about your experience?
Thank you, Orville. Before I get started, thank you so much, Vera and Mohini. I was getting chills when you guys were sharing your stories, and that hits home. That hits home. And it felt so good hearing these stories and sharing it with everyone today. And thank you all for being here and listening to these stories. And I'm pretty sure there are so many other stories out there, because we all are so different, from different backgrounds, different cultures, religions, have so much to say. Okay, so where do I start? my American dream story. So as I said, like ever since I was young, my family was moving around a lot, but for the most part, I was raised in Delhi, India. So moving here wasn't a big of a cultural shock in terms of, because Delhi is such a huge city and New York City is a huge city as well. So, and yeah, so when I was 18, 6 years ago, my parents came up to me and they told me, pack your bags, we are going to United States to get that American dream. So I'm here sitting wondering, okay, what the hell is American dream? What do you exactly mean? Like, I'm literally 18. I'm leaving all of my friends. I really thought that Delhi was going to be that home for me because I was raised there for so many years, and leaving everything behind, like everything I have gotten, that small family that I have gotten there, it was hard. It was hard. And I was at that stage when I was 18. I just didn't know, who am I? Where am I going? Where is this life taking me? So I just did it. I packed my bags. I took that 14 hours, 37 minutes of plane ride and got to United States. And now I'm just like, okay, what do I do with my life? I don't even know what I want to do. So the first thing first was looking for a college. And the time when I moved here, around that time, all the deadlines were closed. And they told me that I have to wait for like a whole semester, right? And I didn't know, like I didn't have any friends, and I just had to go to college. I was that adamant person that I have to go to college. I do not know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to go to college. And I still vividly remember that day. And it was my birthday. It was January 3rd. I was on the train and I see this ad of Borough of Manhattan Community College. It's a CUNY community college. And I see that, and they said, we are taking people for like admissions, right? For fall semester, and it was for spring semester. And I was like, okay, I'm taking this train. I don't know how to get through MTA, but I'm getting there somehow. 2 hours later, I finally made it to BMCC, and I went to the admissions office and I said, I want admissions. I want to get admitted here. What's the procedure? Take me in now. And they were like, okay, girl, what's going on? And then we went through that whole procedure, and then they took me in. And I just couldn't believe, after hearing from all the other CUNY colleges, that if you go to any other college, they are not going to take you in because all the deadlines were closed. And I'm so glad that I listened to my heart, and I was being adamant in a good way that I'm going to go to college. And obviously that was just the beginning of my journey. I'm in college, working full-time the past 4 years. Until now, I'm working full-time to support myself financially to pay for college. It's been a journey. A lot of people have told me, why don't you take a year off and just work full-time, save up money, and then come back? Maybe this is not for you. Like, no, don't get me wrong. There were so many other people out there too who were like so supportive there for me in this process, but also a lot of people who didn't believe in me, right? But I feel like the most important thing is to believe in yourself. And I believed in myself, and I knew that I'm going to do it. And after the 6 years of journey, I'm here with one undergrad degree, getting my master's degree, and hopefully getting my doctoral degree soon. And it's insane to me. And I'm the first person in my family, literally in my whole family, even in my extended family, getting all these degrees. And a lot of times I don't want to look at it in a materialistic way, but more so like all the hard work, endless nights, tears went into it. Sorry, I'm just getting emotional here. So yeah, it took a lot. It took a lot of efforts into it, right? And I feel like one of the most difficult part of this journey, right? It's not all the work I have done, but not recognizing my wins, right? Not really giving credit where it's due. And a lot of us do it, right? Like what Vera said, that it's never enough, right? And thinking about, oh my God, I didn't know that I was gonna cry. Maybe I'm PMSing, who knows? So yeah, I feel like it's so important to understand that we have to give ourselves credit where it's due. And it's so important, like all this time meeting up expectations of our parents, of our society, and like all these things, all these people around you. But what about yourself? When are you going to celebrate those accomplishments that you have achieved, right? Because it took a lot. It took a lot. So I would say that is so important to give yourself that credit. So yeah, that's all. I'm gonna stop here before.
Could I just ask you a question, Fawzia? When you think about expectations, right? Expectations of yourself other areas or from other places where people may have had expectations of you. What are your thoughts about that? Maybe in relation to family or yourself, expectations. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I feel like it's more so like a cultural thing, right? As I have mentioned that I'm the first person in my whole family to get my degree, even though it's not said, but you know it's given, right? And especially I'm that oldest daughter in the house, and everybody knows what happens to that oldest daughter in the house. And there's a lot that you think that you have to achieve. You have to be the role model, right? Even though it's not being said, but it's given, right? Those given rules and regulations that you follow through being the oldest daughter, right? So I think it's a learning process. It's a learning process, and there's a lot to unlearn and relearn, and do first and foremost, start doing things for yourself, right? You're doing all of that. I'm doing all of that. And I'm so proud of myself for doing that, right? But also thinking about, is it really making me happy? Am I just doing it to make my family members happy, or just to be a role model, right? Then I'm not giving them a good role model perspective. If I'm keep sacrificing, if the whole idea of sacrificing, keep sacrificing and keep being that scapegoat for the family, you know?
Thank you so much, Fawzia. And I'm going to share again from the chat box. You have so much support here. More power to you. Props to you, Fawzia. Awesome. Such a beautiful journey. You go. It's okay. This is powerful and personal. You are a warrior. Totally deserve it. You earned it. Thanks for sharing your journey. I love your tenacity and your determination. Celebrate your wins. Oh my gosh, yes. It's unspoken, but always there. Self-care is courage. Oh my, I'm the eldest daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter. I know the feeling. Hugs to you. Thank you again, Fawzia. Thank you. And so now we go on to our next speaker, Sidra. Sidra Chowdhury.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Can you hear
Sidra.
me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, just double checking. My my headphones are acting funny. So before I start, I just wanted to give a special shout out to Sam, to Amelia, to the team at NASW. In addition to the powerful, amazing women that have already spoken, because when I think about like the culmination, the conversations, like why we got to this point, how we got to this point, I mean, I can speak for myself and say that like we needed this space, like we needed this conversation, because I felt like I was having this conversation with so many, folks that look like me or who come from a similar background, but I was kind of starving to have this conversation in a space of other social workers and in a space of, just the helping profession. And so just month after month, conversation after conversation, being a part of the diversity committee, like it did something for me to come to this space and to have the support of the NASW and to, to actually have like a platform, because I'm not used to seeing brown folks, brown women, especially in the helping professions, come to the table and say loud and proud, like, this is my experience. I was coming from a space where folks didn't want to hear my experience. They didn't want to listen to me, in a professional setting. I won't say where, but coming from a space where you're basically told, your job is really just to sort of keep your head down and do what it is that you're required to do what it is that you're paid to do. And that's really the end of it, right? And so when we talk about things like diversity and we talk about creating safe spaces, as a social worker, I wasn't really finding those spaces. And so coming to the diversity committee and coming to the NASW and then finding these amazing folks in this space kind of gave me the ability to come home in a different way, right? They gave me permission to come home to myself. So I'm just, I think so indebted to the group, and I'm just like really happy and really excited that like we're having this conversation, because this certainly isn't the last conversation. I think this is an opportunity to finally sort of open up, I think, this vault of just knowledge and wisdom and passion and anger and joy, right? So it just means a lot for me to be here, and I just want to give a special shout out to to everyone who sort of helped bring it together, and for folks who took the time to come and to hear about our experiences, and hopefully we'll keep coming. So when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about tonight, it was a lot. It was a lot to unpack, and so I hope you'll bear with me, because I'm gonna try to sort of go through a timeline in terms of my experience. So having come here at 6.5, and now being in my 30s, I feel like I have a lot of years to look back and to think about my experience. And so I'll kind of just start with, where I was as a child. So when we left Pakistan, of course, this meant my parents at that time, still fairly young with 3 daughters, basically leaving behind everything. And I didn't really understand why, as a child, everyone was so emotional. When you're that young, you don't quite get what's going on. You're just thinking about, oh, I'm going on an adventure. I'm going to get on an airplane. This is my first time getting on an airplane. So that's where my head was at. But when we landed in the United States, I can tell you the excitement kind of dissipated. And I sort of, even at that young age, was met with this very sort of sad feeling. And I think this feeling was probably best put as like rejection. And one of the first experiences that I remember was basically at the age of 6.5, essentially realizing now, looking back in my 30s, that like at that point, the process of forced assimilation had already started. And the loss of my identity as a Pakistani, as a Muslim, as a brown person, was already beginning to sort of fade away very quickly. And it started with, with my own family members, family members that were born in America, who basically told me that if I didn't begin to speak fluent English and drops, my native language of Urdu, that somehow I was less than. And so, as a 6.5-year-old, very impressionable, I immediately decided to drop my language and to learn English as quickly as possible. So within a matter of a summer, I basically was only speaking English, right? And the messages that I continued to receive, from that point forward, everything from, being in school with my classmates to what I was seeing in television, is that I essentially didn't belong, right? That I was somehow the other, right? Because that feeling that you get is when you're constantly growing up and you're seeing only images, right, on television of blonde-haired, fair-skinned, blue-eyed individuals, you begin to wonder if like there's something wrong with you, right? You don't really realize it at that young of an age. What's truly happening here, right? And so now, like in my 30s, like I think back, like, okay, so what happened to me in adolescence, right? Like when I got to like middle school, as I got into like high school, I think I didn't realize it, but I was essentially on a very sort of subconscious level, like starting to reject like more and more parts of my identity that were linked to my South Asian culture, right? So I think at that point got so used to and being accepted in this country as just being seen as an other, that it just was something I didn't even think about. I was just starting to sort of live this life where, I was getting these messages that I was different. And so therefore I sort of acted as such, right? Like I started to reject my, traditions of the clothing, the beautiful traditional clothing that we wear. I remember walking out on the street with my family and as a young kid, feeling really embarrassed and almost ashamed because people would look at us funny, right? Like, why are those people wearing those clothes? Why are those people putting henna on their hands? And this is before henna got cool, right? Before celebrities started to wear henna, and now everyone wants to wear henna, which is fantastic. But as a child, like when you have henna on your hands and people are making jokes about, well, what's wrong with your hands? What is that? Is that ketchup? Is that fecal matter? I've had family members tell me like, yeah, I had people say like, is that fecal matter on your hands? I mean, so when you're getting these types of messages and you're getting these types of looks, combined with, I think about television and what a like, I don't know, what just a vivid like image it left in my mind. Like I remember things like, The Simpsons, the only brown character being Apu, who used to have this like very strong accent, and then kids turning around and using that accent to like make fun of me and make fun of other brown kids. I just remember, that was the message. That was the message. So it's a long way of saying that I basically, from a very young age, was being othered, but didn't quite know exactly what was happening, right? And then when you're trying to grow into an adult and you're trying to get through what's already a tumultuous time as an adolescent, it's like, well, what do you do? How do you cope, with this trauma, with this change, with all these things that are like coming at you? I decided to sort of throw myself into, American history. I say that with quotations, right? American pop culture, because I thought, maybe this is a way to escape the lack of representation that I've just constantly felt like I can't escape this feeling. I thought it would help me. I thought it would relieve that tension, between sort of my multiple identities, between the Eastern side and the Western side. It's like, well, maybe if I did this, then I'll feel better. But it actually kind of had the opposite effect, right? I went into college, I went into adulthood thinking, I'm gonna figure this out. I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm going to figure this out. And, in my college years, I found myself further confused to an extent, right? And it wasn't until I started coming across other individuals of color, I felt like I couldn't really rely on my professors, because my professors weren't discussing topics that were relevant to me, relevant to my background, or representative of me and all of my peers. And so I, just like we all do in college, we turn to people that are similar to us, right? That come from similar backgrounds. And so it wasn't until I started surrounding myself with people of color, especially, my Black friends, that I realized that everything I had taken in, everything I had experienced, the trauma of being an immigrant, the changes, the toxicity, all of these things, nothing is what I thought it was, right? Like what I was taught in the history books and what I was told by people around me, or the toxic situations that I found myself being a part of, I felt like I finally had like a little bit of an understanding that this wasn't my fault, right? That I wasn't responsible for this. I wasn't responsible for the culture, the mindset, the media. It wasn't my doing, like I was just here existing, trying to navigate these difficult spaces while trying to hold all these heavy, heavy things in my head and in my heart. And I don't want to paint this like really overly negative picture, because there are sort of sparks of light in there, right? Like I had people in my life who were really supportive. I gravitated towards, mentors and friends who really held me up, right? And gave me the space to just be myself, and gave me permission to slowly sort of start re-accepting who I was and what I was about. So it wasn't, it wasn't all negative, but it was just, I think I'm trying to give you a sense of the pain and of the, of that feeling of just experiencing coming to a brand new place and suddenly not knowing why you're being treated different, to go from a country, I mean, I was 6.5, from being in my motherland, in my homeland, where everyone looked like me, everyone dressed like me, everyone celebrated, all the holidays together. There was no question of where family was. And, I mean, being able to access family, like within a matter of minutes, I mean, all of that changed, so I hope that gives you a sense of sort of all these things that were plaguing me, right? And now I didn't really even realize until my 30s, until I got to this point where, I just started pushing back. It's like, no, like I am worthy. I am not different in a negative way. I don't have to be these things that, the American media or that, the ignorance of other people were making me feel. Like I'm not those things, right? And so that sort of fight began. And I think, I guess for the sake of not going too much longer, I just want to cover like the most difficult part of this, I think, was just realizing now just the depth of the loss, right? And I think every person that talked before me talked about this is the depth of loss and the depth of separation, like physically, symbolically. Like immigration is trauma, like that's what we've all experienced, and it comes with you know, a loss of your identity comes with the loss of familiarity. It comes with, you know, so much to handle without necessarily the proper tools or the resources, or even, you know, sometimes the people to be able to help you cope, you know. And that wasn't just for me, that was also for my parents. Now you could imagine, you know, with having, you know, Vera and Mohini talk about their journeys, it's like, you know, they make me think about my mother, they make me think about my father at their age coming here with, you know, with 3 children, what exactly they were going through. And so I just think about just that constant tension. I think the constant tension was probably the most difficult part of my journey, because that tension extended over the course of so many years, you know. In America, I'm not quite American enough, but in Pakistan, I'm not quite Pakistani enough. So where does that leave me? You know, like when you're constantly getting these messages, where do you stand? You know, I mean, how does that work? Like, who are you supposed to be? How do you identify, you know? And I think maybe 2 of the areas that I want to focus on that were probably the worst that I can think of was just the post 9/11 era, right? So being, you know, a Muslim person, you know, and living in this world where, you know, I grew up in Queens, New York, and, you know, my sisters went to Islamic school when they were very, very young. And so they would wear the hijab, you know, seeing the way that the world was responding to them and the way that the world was responding to me, because of something that frankly had nothing to do with me, my family, my community, my religion. I mean, you know, the fact that the media now began to sort of equate, you know, my religion and my identity with something really horrible just had a terrible, you know, terrible blowback. I mean, it was like every part of my life. I mean, I was scared. I was fearful of, you know, what would happen if my parents, you know, were leaving for work that day. Was I going to see them? Were they going to be attacked on the street? You know, living in this so-called bubble of New York City doesn't protect us from any of that, you know, this very diverse place. And so I think the post 9/11 world combined with the Trump era, I think the Trump era just reignited those wounds and kind of brought me back to a place of like pretty deep, I think, deep hurt and deep depression, because it was just, it's like the person who we call our president is basically saying that Muslims need to have identification cards, you know, or that we are somehow less than. I mean, to just be, it was just a reminder. It served as a constant reminder. And the fact that, you know, American citizens, people, you know, who have stood next to me went to the voting booth and elected this hateful person. I mean, it was such a mind-blowing and just horrible experience when it was happening. Like, I just couldn't believe, you know, there was so much pain that it sort of just evoked and brought back up. And so I'm going to wrap up because I feel like I've been going for a while, I'm going to wrap up by just saying, yeah, I'm going to wrap up by just saying that I think that the thing that we feel across the board as immigrants also is the pressure to be like really, really successful, right? So I'm by all means a successful person. Like I'm happy, I have my master's, I have, you know, my LMSW, my sisters are incredibly educated, you know, smart, brilliant women, you know, who are doing well. And so I think about the fact that my parents' sacrifice was worth it in that sense, right? But I also think about it as there was, I think Fawzia touched on this level of sort of anxiety and guilt and this need to be like a total perfectionist and to succeed beyond any means necessary, because anything short of that is basically saying to my parents, your sacrifices weren't worth it. You know, so we take on this guilt and this weight, right, associated with this huge transition. You know, I have to succeed by any means necessary. Like, it doesn't matter what comes. And I think that comes with this fair share of difficulties, right? So I think it's been an interesting experience. I think it's been an interesting journey. I have to say that if I hadn't experienced those things, I think I wouldn't have been able to re-experience the beauty of reconnecting with my culture, reconnecting with, you know, my religion, my community, you know, all of the beautiful things that, you know, I felt like the world was telling me weren't beautiful things. You know, I feel like I've been able to reconnect, and there's so much beauty in that. And so I'm grateful, you know, for re-experiencing and for being able to sort of, I think someone said this in the chat, like break free of these chains. You know, it's a beautiful space to be, you know, to know that I didn't let this forced assimilation take away all of the things that are wonderful, you know, so I'll stop with that. I have no idea how long I've been talking.
Okay, we have time. Sidra, thank you so much. And, you know, to review some of the things that have been said, you know, in the chat. I was told that I bring roaches to work, and I had a long battle with the system then onwards. Terrible. I could not have said it any better. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Thanks for giving voice to experiences of trauma that all Muslims experienced. Oh my gosh. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Thank you, Sidra. Thank you for creating this space. I finally feel a sense of belonging. Yes. Oh my gosh. The pain of that model minority myth is real. Immigration is trauma. That is very powerful, Sidra. We immigrate for survival, for greater opportunities, but it is traumatic being pulled from our communities and homes, leaving our families. It is not an easy choice. So eloquently said about the emotional cost of membership as a hyphenated American, the aspects of identity one gives up as an immigrant. It was so powerful. These stories are so empowering for me. I am so glad I joined the space today. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. All right, folks. So we're going to move into the next phase of our discussion, and I'm going to pivot back to Mohini, and I'm going to ask Mohini, starting with Mohini, if she can talk to how can people be an ally to South Asians, and what's important to keep in mind, right? So Mohini, we're pivoting back to you, and if you could speak to that, how can people be an ally to South Asians? We're all ears. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just having spaces like these where we can unpack all the things that we've been holding and giving the language to the emotions that we are feeling. I mean, that's a start. So I think that's very important. I mean, what you all heard today was from just 4 of us, from, you know, similar experiences, but, you know, South Asian countries are vast and there are so many. So just keeping that in mind, that there is so much of diversity that exists within the South Asian community in terms of religious beliefs, practices, holidays, languages, food, traditions, cultural norms and expectations. I mean, just keeping that in mind itself is, you know, you can be an ally. And you know, especially in clinical therapeutic relationships, you know, and you know, other professional settings, just keeping in mind that, you know, we should not be clubbed into one single category. I mean, here we are talking about South Asian, but we all know that the Asian category includes South Asian and Southeast Asian. That's a whole different thing. So even like putting people in one bucket without understanding what it actually means, I think there needs to be more awareness. And I know like we are going to be doing different series where we are going to take up different topics to kind of talk about, so that we can unpack it for folks who want to learn, so that they can be culturally sensitive and culturally competent to help, because, you know, such a lot of harm is happening when we don't do that, when we don't understand the uniqueness, the sensitivities, the power dynamics that comes in when you club everybody in one category. And then, you know, keeping in mind, like, you know, people's, like, you know, I heard people talking about immigration as being trauma, and I know like doing trauma informed work is kind of like what people are looking for, understanding the kind of trauma people might be going through or what can be re-traumatizing. You know, here I am, you know, almost 50-50, same number of years I've been in India and I have been here. I still wonder, where do I belong? And what all I had to unlearn to try to assimilate, only to find out it was never going to work. So now I'm relearning. It's like I'm relearning everything that I forcefully unlearned, right? So what does that do to me? What is that going to do to me as I'm raising children in this country, who are against, like, I know we are called, American born confused daisies, like, that's the term that a lot of people use about, like, we are confused. That generation is confused. And Sidra, I feel, because I'm raising kids and I make sure they don't go through what you went through because of my own experience. So that generational, connection needs to happen in therapy, in professions. And then just, understanding where people came from, when they came from, what age they came from, when they were in this country, can have a whole different way of treating somebody.
Mhm.
And, I just want to share one personal example. Few years ago, my older child was diagnosed with clinical depression. And I was trying to work with the school system to get accommodation. And everywhere, and my child is exceptionally bright, gifted, right? And every time I asked for accommodation, it kind of felt like I was being that pushy Indian mother, overachieving mother who was trying to get accommodation, not even understanding that, that lack of focus or inability to do work could be because of executive dysfunctioning, that could be a side effect of depression or even ADHD. So, like, people don't even want to think beyond. So there's so much of assumption. So I think we have a lot of work that we need to do, but having these spaces and, being vulnerable to even share our stories, and for folks to listen to our stories and learn something from it. If you can take away one thing and apply, and before you assume about the person in front of you, and give it a real good thought, I think that would be a start for being an ally.
Thank you so much, Mohini. Thank you. Thank you. And from Mohini, we'll go pivot back to Vera. And Vera, we have the same questions for you. How can people be an ally to South Asians, and what's important to keep in mind?
So thanks, Mohini, for finishing up with that word of assumption, because sometimes I feel that on my daily basis, I'm carrying this invisible hammer with me, ready to break a stereotype, maybe one a day, or maybe multiple in the same day. And that's a lot of work, really, because being South Asian is not just chicken tikka masala or saag paneer. And South Asian is also not heavy saris, heavy clothes, jewelries. South Asian is being human like everybody else, with distinct individual behaviors, environmental pressures, preferences, languages, different identities, values, and traditions, like anybody else in this world. So, to me, the most important thing to be an ally is to teach, and this is something that I always say, teach your tongue to say, I don't know, and teach your tongue to ask questions. Because when you start doing that, you open the doors, not just for yourself, but also for the other person sitting opposite to you and trying to convey the issues. When we go with assumptions, we are literally locking those doors. We are not asking questions. We are just judging, and we are only focusing on solutions that we assume are the right thing to do, but not really asking that other person, what do you want? What is it that's affecting you? That I have felt through experience. When I needed help, I felt everywhere I went, it was like, oh, it'll be fine, you'll be okay. You shouldn't be thinking like that. It's all right. It's just a passing phase. It's not just a passing phase. You don't even realize what I'm going through. You should just ask me what help do I need? Maybe I'm not able to convey it the way I want to. And when I'm on the other side of the table, and I'm working with diverse communities. And if I don't know something, I just remember my experience that maybe that person is going through a similar situation. Let me ask. And when I ask, I feel satisfied, not just as a professional, but also as a person that maybe I'm doing the right job. I would just say that. Ask questions, don't assume.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vera. And if we pivot to the chat box, we see there's a lot of agreement with you there. Yes, I have so many issues with the term ABCD. As a mother myself, I feel you. Thanks for sharing. That's right, Vera. Yes, Vera, it's not just a passing phase. Yes, yes. So there's a lot of agreement with the things that you had to say, Vera. Thank you so much. From Vera, we return to Fawzia. Fawzia, and we have the same questions for you. How can people be an ally to South Asians, and what's important to keep in mind?
Thank you, Arvil. Thank you, Vera and Mohini, for sharing. So echoing to what Vera and Mohini was saying, I think there is a lot of need of acknowledging of who we are, right? Knowing that South Asia is such a dense country, right? There are so many different dense countries, and we are such heavy on culture, religion, and it means so much to us, right? Because it's part of our identities, right? And on that note, what I want to say is it's so important to start acknowledging our religious holidays. It's so important. It's so important to name them, to advocate for the days that we need off. Email box not be full on the day off, so that we are not feeling guilty about going back and forth with our email boxes on our day off when we want to celebrate our festivals, right? For instance, right now, a lot of us are observing Ramadan, right? I know a lot of my Hindu, because of the fact that I'm from India, I know a lot of a lot of Hindu festivals too. So Navratri, I know a lot of them, they fast. Navratri too. So really acknowledging, really knowing that who are the people you are working with, right? Who are that whole job process, getting a job is so long, right? In that little process, if you could add on, what are some religious accommodations you would need if you're working with us, right? Your supervisors, your managers, being mindful of just a little email, sending out a little email to the whole office that, hey, I'll say my name, like, hey, Fawzia is observing Ramadan this month, so just be mindful of, about what she needs, right? It's just acknowledgement makes so much difference, right? So that you're not feeling guilty. Like being South Asian itself is, you're always feeling guilty about like taking days off. I have to keep working, hustle, 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 no days off for me. And it's just a lot, right? So seeing that acknowledgement makes such a huge difference. So I would say, to be an ally, start looking out for people you work with, right? Being more mindful of what you are saying, because we really are tired of not even water. Like we really are. We don't want to hear this anymore. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Fawzia. Each and every one of you has come up with various things that I identify from various perspectives, various types of pressures. But if any of you could speak to any one particular pressure that you felt that you were exposed to first coming here, what might that be? Fawzia, would you mind addressing that question? What might that pressure be?
Like pressure of
From the society coming here. Yeah.
To be smart, like just assume that I'm really good at math. That was just a joke, but yeah, there's just like a lot of assumptions around. A lot of my friends from India, they think like social work, trust me, social workers are being treated shitty in India. They don't care about social workers. They just think you just become a social worker because you couldn't be anything else. But it takes a lot of labor. It takes a lot of emotional labor to be this person, to be able to hold spaces for people and for this world. And we need it. We're seeing it around us every single day, every second. So like there's a lot of, I have always thought to myself, there's a lot of pressure around like choosing that right career for yourself. You know, you don't want to starve yourself to death, right? Forget about your passion. Just think about, like, you know, that you should be an engineer or a doctor or XYZ. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fawzia. And from the other panelists, anything in particular that stands out for you with regard to pressure? Yes, Sidra.
Yeah, I just had a quick, and I'll keep this very, very short. I think there's this ongoing pressure to be the all-knowing, all-educating, you know, like when someone is gaslighting my experience as a woman of color, it suddenly also becomes my responsibility then to teach that person to fight back that entity, to, you know, so not only do I have to do the work of healing myself and trying to navigate difficult spaces and difficult conversations, I somehow also become the person who has to speak for all Muslims, all brown people, all Pakistanis, all, you know, women, all, you know, hijabis versus non-hijabis. I mean, there's, you know, so when you said pressure, it's like, wow, like, okay, so it's not enough to have to navigate these spaces. I now also have to be that person. I mean, I'm not, but, you know, it's this constant, as if the work is solely on, you know, on us.
And Vera and Mohini, would you like to say anything about that theme of
Yeah.
pressure?
Yeah, because I just remembered, this was funny, but I was asked by one of my friends, like, oh, you chose social work? In India, they, like, social workers have this, you know, they wear cotton dresses and they have these huge bags and they go out helping in the slums. How did you decide on doing PhD in social work? Why couldn't you choose IT or something else? And it was like, why don't you go and educate yourself a little more? You know, now that I think about it, it makes me laugh, but at the person's ignorance. And over the time, you know, that person has been a friend. And over the years, I have been able to educate, you know, them, and they're able to identify and think it from another angle. But just imagine more than, you know, one person coming up with that question. And this also goes back to that model minority situation, where, you know, oh, you're from India, you're in the bank, right? You're in the IT, you're very good in math, you have to be. So these are these, you know, subtle pressures that accumulate and become so heavy to push back, to put aside, because you're constantly fighting with that particular identity. You know, you are always under this veil of something else, and you always have to, you know, come out moving that aside. It's very tiring sometimes, and it's very depressing, because you feel like, where do I stand? What's my real identity? And sometimes it comes from your own community, and it's very stressful. It's very demoralizing, demotivating.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Vera. And Mohini, did you have anything that you'd like to say regarding pressures?
Yeah, yeah. And I know we didn't bring that much in our earlier conversations, but I also feel that pressure of being, you know, trying to, and, you know, now we know why it happens, but, you know, there are other immigrants who don't want to associate themselves with you because of this whole notion of like, oh, I've been here like 20 years, so you are the new person, and people ignore you, or they don't want to be associated because they feel that it's like the system has created that hierarchy, which is toxic, and it doesn't serve anyone. It's like, if you get the seat on the table, at the table, you should bring in extra seat for other people who look like you, not gloat with you being the only person of color on that table. So I think a lot of work needs to happen in that, because it can be very isolating. And also, I mean, we need to, so there is that pressure. And then I also feel the pressure somebody posted on the chat is about the whole mental health, you know, how that needs to be kind of, we need to talk more about it, because, it's like stigma, shame, and then people trying to alienate themselves from that situation because it's not happening with me or my family, it's that family. Like there is so much of unpacking that we need to do even within our own community. We need to be kinder to each other, and create more spaces and be vulnerable to share, but also have the courage to say you're sorry if you messed up somewhere. So being that, and more of those conversations need to happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohini. And keeping to our timeline, I'm going to return back now to our question again, to Sidra. And Sidra, I ask you, how can people be an ally to South Asians, and what's important to keep in mind?
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Sidra, sorry.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Thank
Okay. So there was a couple of things that I wanted to highlight really quickly, because I think with the fact that this is our very first conversation, there are so many topics and so much to cover, that I think we can definitely do in future conversations in this series. But some of the things that really stand out to me, even from a personal experience with attempting to find therapists, right? So we have, although culturally speaking, I can say that the older generations in my community really, this idea of going to a therapist, or, stepping outside of the family, to talk about mental health problems, that's an area like you guys just said, like that's something we have to navigate. But for us younger folks, who are a little bit more willing to, go the route of seeking mental health services, or looking for a psychologist, looking for a therapist, I think cultural competency is huge, right? So, I think about my own experience of talking to, multiple white men and women who are psychologists, who I felt like I spent most of my time really just trying to educate them on who I was and where I came from. And, I felt like obviously those relationships didn't work out because I felt unsafe. I found myself in a space that essentially was one of judgment, right, around everything from, Muslim women, and, wearing the hijab versus not wearing the hijab, family structure. I mean, to not have an understanding of the clients that you're taking on, I think there's a huge disservice and creates more harm than help, right? More harm than support. And so I think it's absolutely key to really understand like who's sitting in front of you, and when you're thinking about who you're taking on, is your level of comfort with understanding the dynamics, the structures within just the community itself. And when we say community, I mean, the way things look in Vera's family could be very different from the way that things look in my family, right? It's from family to family, from culture to culture. And so I think just focus on being as familiar as possible and working on the cultural competency, and not necessarily having to put your client in the position of really having to justify who they are, and to have to explain and educate and really do all the work, right? So another thing is just, I think it goes back to Orville's earlier question is, we spent a lot of time, Mohini and Vera and us in the diversity committee, talking about the fact that we've, in our lifetimes, in our immigrant journey, have really spent too much time making other people feel comfortable while being very uncomfortable ourselves. And an example of that would be like, when I introduce myself, or, someone I know introduces themselves to someone for the first time who's not familiar with South Asian names or Arabic names and can't quite figure out how to pronounce it. I've had multiple people ask me if they can call me Sid, if they can shorten my name and create an easy nickname so that they can feel more comfortable. And, it's taken a lot of work for me to be able to say no. Like, Sidra is my name, that's my identity, that links me with my ancestors, that links me with my heritage. And so no, the name is such a powerful thing. And so I think just asking folks, you know, I think looking at ourselves, I think looking within and not being afraid, you know, to ask those questions, just like Vera and Mohini were saying. It's like to not be afraid to be curious and to come to the table and say, you know, I don't understand, but I want to learn. And I think to just piggyback off of Fawzia's piece on the religious holidays, you know, I think even something as small but as powerful as creating like a calendar that has a list of everyone's, you know, holidays or religious observances on there can make all the difference, right? It's about creating that opportunity for conversation and creating that opportunity for questions. You know, the responsibility shouldn't necessarily have to be completely on us. And I think, you know, when you think about your places of work, you know, whether you're in a university setting or whether you're supervising, you know, interns or whether you have a staff, I think if you're in a, this will be my last point, if you're in a position of authority, if you have some say in that person's experience, please use your authority to support them. So if you have someone, you know, I'll use my sisters as an example, you know, they are Muslim women who wear hijabs, and I can't tell you the number of times we've had conversations about their experiences around just, you know, I walk into a room and it's like immediately that's all they see. Like I'm no longer a person, right? I'm just the woman with the hijab on her head. And it's incredibly isolating, and it's incredibly, I think, hurtful, right? To just be sort of sized up as just that, right? So I think if you have some say, if you have some, you know, I think being a strong ally means making yourself uncomfortable in order to support the person sitting next to you. And so if that means striking up a conversation, if that means, you know, making sure that when you're planning, you know, get-togethers at work, you know, think about who's around the table, right? I think about things like, you know, Muslims don't drink alcohol. So if you're gathering folks at a time where, you know, and in a space where you're all getting together at a bar, you know, it's incredibly isolating for someone who doesn't drink, right? Who for religious reasons, you know, can't eat pork or can't have, you know, food that's not halal. So I think it's up to us, even in those ways, to sort of extend our hand, right? And the only way that we can get to that point is to ask questions and to find ways to open that conversation. So I will just leave it at that.
Thank you again, Sidra. And there was a lot of commentary, continues to be a lot of commentary in that chat box. There were some resources that were posted here. And then also with regard to what was some of what was said a little bit earlier, struggling to find a brown therapist, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, my son was like, nobody respects immigrant kids in school. I was like, oh my goodness. Have you searched this particular organization down here? There's an organization left in here as a resource. Brown therapists are another story. They tend to judge you and shuttle patriarchy, some of them. Burden of teaching constantly is so draining. Yes, and here we are with another, looks like excellent resource for South Asian therapists.org that some of us may want to latch onto from the chat. And yes, Sidra, in relation to what you had said a little earlier, the reclamation, reclaiming our names. Yes, yes. No one could have said it better. Explaining and educating is so tiresome. Thank you for validating the tokenism that exists and its impact in our community. Absolutely. It's taken a lot of work to stop allowing folks to mangle my name. That's so much of who I am. You must note that large numbers of women are displaced due to children in our community. It has been a back and forth journey, Vera to Vera and back to Vera. Yes, and it is important to have skill building, friendship, and community and cultural celebrations. Yes, and lastly, I've learned to ask people how to say their name, no matter how simple it seems. Yeah, such important stuff. Okay, so we haven't quite come to an end, because now we have a bit of an opportunity to open up this circle for discussion. And for those of you who've been here sitting patiently and listening to this amazing presentation, are there questions? Are there comments? Would anyone like to please raise their hands, or if no one else is speaking, speak up, unmute yourselves and ask a question now if you'd like. Yes, Bob.
It's been an education in terms of many, many things I was not aware of, did not know, and helpful to have suggestions about asking.
Thank you. Other thoughts, other questions, observations? Ruxar, yes, Ruki.
First of all, thank you so much for being here, for hosting the panel. I just really wanted to say that it was like I didn't realize how much I needed this space. So thank you. Thank you to the NASW for hosting this as well. I was wondering if the panelists, if you would mind for any students to like connect with you, whether it's like on LinkedIn or you know, other like sites and such, because this is just something that needs to be like an ongoing thing. And I'm very grateful that it seems to be, but I'm hoping that we could continue this dialogue like elsewhere too.
Thank you, Ruki. Thank you. Other
Yeah,
questions?
I think, well, I just wanted to jump in to respond to Ruki. I think, yes, absolutely, 100%. And I'm sure I can speak for everyone else on this panel, right? Like any opportunity to connect and to sort of broaden the circle and to continue having these conversations, yes, please count me in, whether that's, you know, even sort of an informal mentor relationship. Like I volunteer myself constantly because we need each other in this conversation. So, you know, I'm happy to share, you know, my personal email, you know, whatever way you think that, you know, that I can be of a support, I'm more than happy to be, so.
I did to Sidra there because, yeah, this is very important. It's more like the tip of an iceberg because there is so much more and this is just the beginning. So I'm also available if you want to connect with me. I can share my email, shoot your questions, your concerns, you know, need for resources. Even if you just want somebody to hear you out, that's fine, no problem, we are there, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Vera. And we do have another question. Alvaro.
Hi, it's not.
Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was just going to say thank you very much. It was nice to listen to all these stories. Immigrant stories are so powerful and they're very beautiful too. And there's, like Sidra said, there's a lot of trauma in them, but I love listening to immigrant stories because they're so different. Our experiences are all different. I am an immigrant from Central America, and you know, my mom's story is a very special one, and I love listening to her talk about it. And you know, I relate to Sidra a lot because we both were immigrants as children, and that experience is also a very different one than immigrating as an adult and growing up in New York City. But I just want to say thank you very much. It was very lovely to listen to all your stories.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, observations? No? Well, I'm going to ask the group. We are at the hour-and-a-half time point in this discussion. Certainly, we could continue the discussion. I'm going to ask for a sense of the body from our panelists about where we stand, or about where we sit now with our discussion.
So I'm just going to jump in really quick. I'm just curious to know from the group before we wrap up if there are specific topics that came to mind that you'd love to dive into further, because again, this is, you know, the first time that we've essentially began this series, and so we're just curious, you know, we're curious about which topics or which areas specifically you would love to see covered for future events, so we can sort of hit the ground running and get going on that. So
Ruki, yes, go ahead.
I think for me, one of the things that I'd really like, we started this discussion, and it's a really big one, just kind of addressing the biases within our own communities, specifically, you know, finding a South Asian therapist or a provider, but also dealing with like the fear that comes along with disclosing certain things to South Asian providers. It's a big topic, like in terms of like mental health acceptance and just awareness of what's going on in our own communities.
Thank you, Ruki.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I have a question.
Yes, Sonia, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely amazing and a very riveting discussion. I felt like I was able to identify with so many of what all of you were saying. I would love to hear just more about what you see unfolding in terms of this particular panel and how frequently this might be a meeting, and what do you see it evolving into in terms of discussion and outcomes?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Nivedita Kumar.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for this space. I think it's a wonderful panel. I thank all of you for sharing your stories. But I wonder why some of us are like, even our degrees are not valued here. Like I see a lot of people who come here who are very qualified. They don't, make it because of their accent or mannerisms. So I feel that's almost like keeping the undocumented without giving them any resource to get documented. So, and I see that there are still one or two organizations that are making use of this, and they are peddling cheap labor. But I think we should build another space that, that can mentor immigrants. I just want to say that. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nivedita. Thank you so much. And Sam Fletcher. Yes.
First of all, this was so much better than I knew it was going to be powerful because I've listened to you all talk about this, but this is one of the best chapter chats we've ever had. And it's so needed. I'm a little mad at all of you because you made me a little cry, and I don't cry. But in listening to what you're saying, I think going off of the last comment, and I know we'll talk about this tomorrow because we're meeting tomorrow, but I think that it would be really powerful. I'm hearing a need for regular meetings like this and spaces like this, but I think it'd be very powerful to do a CE or chapter, I don't care, whatever we do, with assimilation. Because the fact that the US society kind of forces assimilation, because I think this goes with like, why doesn't my degree matter here? Why, am I not getting jobs because of my accent and everything? Is this forced assimilation? And everything you described today is a form of cultural genocide, of you having to choose, do I adhere to my culture? My culture's not appreciated, my religion's not appreciated. And I think as social workers, we're well positioned that first we got to start with ourselves. We have to train social workers, because sometimes social workers are the ones forcing the assimilation of that you need to be that, you got to act this way or act this way to be American, instead of teaching society that no, these are beautiful cultures that we get to, I'm not South Asian, but I love your cultures. And I want to be, I want to celebrate with you. I want to celebrate your holidays with you. I want to celebrate, Eid at the end of Ramadan with you. That's a really fun, exciting day. So I think we've got to start training social workers to think differently, that we need to stop pushing assimilation and welcome the cultures and learn more about the cultures and celebrate with the different cultures. So again, I'm mad at you. You made me teary and I don't like it, but it was phenomenal, you all. Good job.
Thank you, Sam. All right. Other questions, observations? Anything anyone else would like to say? Certainly there's a lot of activity over there in that chat box, resources needed. Thank you so much for pointing out these issues. There's an agreement with so much of what's been said here. Absolutely. What a wonderful panel discussion this evening. And I know that those of us here who work to put this together will have an interesting discussion about this tomorrow night. Yes. Thank you so much, Sam. And with that, I'm just going to ask one more time to the panelists if there's anything else that any of them would like to volunteer to this discussion before we say good evening and good night to one another? Panelists?
I just want to say that I'm feeling so grateful and blessed to be able to share this space with Sidra, Mohini, and Vera. And I feel so moved. I feel so moved, and it's incredible to be able to listen to everyone's stories and being able to share mine. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And, I'm so glad that you all were able to resonate. And I'm pretty sure there are so many stories out there that's not being told yet, and it should be out there in the world and being heard by everyone because we worked real hard for it. And yeah, I hope to see you all in the future chats we do. And definitely feel free to reach out for any kind of conversation. I'm always up for a good conversation and any ideas you have or any topics you want to discuss or share. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Orville, for being such an amazing facilitator. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fawzia. And Vera, yes, go ahead.
So thank you, Nivedita, for raising that question about the degrees, because I just want to share an experience here, and I think it should also be one of the topics that we can discuss later in the series, because I remember I did my bachelor's and my master's from Jamia Millia Islamia. It is a very famous university in New Delhi. And the degrees that they give, half of it is written in Urdu and half of it is translated, the same thing, translated in English. And I remember when I was traveling, I didn't want to lose my baggage, if there's some checking or something. I remember carrying those degrees in my cabin baggage. And in Heathrow, when I was being checked, obviously the degrees came out and they were written in, the part of it was written in Urdu. You don't realize that how people look at your degrees in a way that can be so scary and create so much of pressure around you. Because I remember the officer who was checking, he said, "What's that in Arabic script?" And I said, "That's Urdu, and it's my degree, it's my bachelor's degree and my master's degree." And he said, "What does it mean?" I said, "This entire thing is translated exactly in English, if you can just pull the entire document out." And that was not enough. He had to call somebody who could read Urdu, read it aloud, translate it, and explain that, yes, what she's saying is the right thing. Now, imagine somebody who's trying to get their degrees evaluated. Just that experience, because when I wanted to get all these degrees evaluated when I came here, just for the sake of having, the equivalent GPA for, my courses and everything else, I was so scared. I didn't want to bring out those degrees and get them evaluated, because first I didn't know, how will I be labeled? Will I lose those documents? Because those are hard-earned degrees. I worked for them. 3 years of bachelor's and 2 years of master's. I don't want any harm, but I can imagine somebody going through similar trauma just to get the degrees evaluated. And it's not a very simple process. It's a huge process, very expensive, and not everybody can do it. So Nivedita, thank you so much for bringing this out, because this is a big problem. Many people fail and forego higher studies because they don't have the resources to get their degrees evaluated. So I think that is something that can be discussed in the chapter chat as well. That's like losing a big, workforce out there. Great professionals are going through the gap. Thank you for this evening. I'm super happy and light, really.
Okay.
I just wanted to give a quick thank you to Orville for helping us, get to, I think, what was a very sort of powerful and equally heavy conversation. But also I'm very grateful to the other panelists and, for the folks that are still on. I think I just want to say that if you didn't hear anything else that any of us said tonight. I think the one thing that I just want to share is that I hope you know how important you are, and that you take any opportunity you can to make your voice be heard, even if you're completely terrified, right? So if that means that there's an opportunity to be on a committee, if there's an opportunity to mentor, you know, if there's an opportunity to stand up and to say, this is who I am and this is where I come from, please take it. No matter where you are in your journey, you know, with any one of us, you know, and anywhere in between, just, you know, just, I think our voice is important. And I think, you know, we matter, and we should take every opportunity that we can to share who we are and where we come from, and to not let this forced assimilation that's, you know, 24/7 for us, I think drive that, you know, to be the driving force. So thank you. And I hope all of you come back.
Agreed.
And bring your friends with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sidra. Thank you, Fawzia. Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Mohini. Thank you all for this wonderful opportunity for us to come together like this. I feel so honored to be a part of this. And I think that with that, oh, wait a minute. We have one more. Did I see a Sophia? Sophia, yes, please go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, I just want to thank all the panelists for just creating this space. I just want to say, like, literally everything everyone said, I can relate to. I feel like those are all my lived experiences. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. It's like, I'm like, oh my God, these are all my thoughts. I'm hearing all my thoughts out loud. But it just feels great to know that there is that space being created. I wish I can continue to contribute to that space. And I just look forward to being part of that allyship who can really talk about the effects and the impacts of the assimilation growing up that I firsthand experienced. And I'm still dealing with that trauma of assimilating and like connecting back to my religion, which I feel so disconnected from. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And I think with that, I'm going to say thank you all again so much. I wish you a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime real soon. Thank you all so much, and have a great night.